The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, a rude awakening like machine gun fire, causing Marcus Chun to flinch involuntarily. His weathered hands, scarred from shrapnel and rope burns, trembled as they wrapped around the ceramic coffee mug, a simple white cup that somehow felt heavier than the M4 carbine he'd once carried through the mountains of Afghanistan. The tremor was subtle, almost imperceptible to most observers, but Marcus felt it like a neon sign advertising his brokenness to the world. At 29, he looked older than his years. His black hair, once regulation short and pristine, now fell in disheveled waves across his forehead. Dark circles under his brown eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights filled with the echoes of mortar rounds and the final screams of brothers who would never see home again. The University of Washington sweatshirt he wore hung loose on his frame 40 pounds lighter than his peak fighting weight, courtesy of months when food tasted like ash and eating felt like a betrayal of those who would never taste anything again. Marcus had chosen the corner booth deliberately, his back against the solid brick wall, eyes maintaining clear sight lines to all entrances and exits. Old habits died hard, even in the safety of Seattle's University District. His laptop screen glowed with mechanical engineering coursework stress analysis equations that seemed laughably simple compared to calculating blast radiuses and enemy firing positions under live fire. The GI Bill was his lifeline now, education his only path forward from the wreckage of his former life. But it was the tattoo that drew stares, the one he couldn't hide when rolling up his sleeves to work. The intricate artwork covered his entire left forearm, a masterpiece of black and gray ink that had taken 3 painful sessions to complete. At its center lay the golden seal trident, the symbol that had once defined his entire identity. The Budweiser, as Seals called it, was surrounded by a constellation of coordinates, dates, and names that read like a graveyard registry to those who understood their significance. 33.9391N, 67.7100E, curved along the top in precise military font, the exact coordinates, where his world had exploded into chaos and heroism on a ridge outside Kandahar. Below it, 3 names were etched in elegant script: Danny Morrison, Miguel Santos, and James Ghost Patterson. Each name was accompanied by the same date, September 15th, 2021, the day Marcus's team had walked into hell, and not everyone had walked back out. The tattoo artist in San Diego had worked in reverent silence as Marcus described each element. The man was a Marine veteran himself and recognized the sacred nature of what he was creating. This wasn't just ink and skin art, it was a living memorial, a permanent reminder of bonds forged in combat and severed by enemy fire. The artist had refused payment, understanding that some debts could never be settled with money. 3 college students at the neighboring table had been stealing glances at Marcus for the past 10 minutes, their whispered conversations growing progressively bolder. They were everything he and his fallen brothers had fought to protect young. Privileged, free to pursue their dreams without fear of IEDs or sniper fire. Yet their freedom had bred a casual ignorance that cut deeper than any enemy blade. Tyler Morrison, no relation to Danny, despite the cruel irony of the shared surname, was the ringleader. 21 years old, trust fund secured, summer internship at Daddy's law firm guaranteed. His biggest struggle was choosing between Harvard Law and Yale, not choosing which brother to leave behind on a blood-soaked mountainside. Tyler's voice carried that particular brand of confidence that came from never having consequences for his actions, never having his worldview shattered by the harsh realities that lurked beyond his ivory tower existence. Marcus tried to focus on his differential equations, but the students' comments kept penetrating his concentration like incoming artillery. His jaw clenched as fragments of their conversation reached his ears. Military worship, toxic masculinity, probably never even deployed. Each word was a fresh wound, salt poured into injuries that had never properly healed. The panic attack started subtly, as they always did. First came the familiar tightness in his chest, as if someone was slowly tightening a steel band around his rib cage. His breathing became shallow and rapid, the same hyperventilation response that had once helped him maintain alertness during 48-hour reconnaissance missions, but now served only to flood his system with unnecessary adrenaline in the safety of a Seattle coffee shop. His vision began to tunnel, the edges of his sight growing dark as his nervous system prepared for combat that would never come. The cafe sounds, espresso machines, casual conversations, chair legs scraping against hardwood floors began to distort and blend into the phantom sounds of helicopter rotors and distant gunfire that haunted his damaged psyche. Marcus's left hand instinctively moved to his right shoulder, pressing against the spot where shrapnel had torn through muscle and tendon, ending his military career with surgical finality. The physical therapy had restored most of his range of motion, but phantom pain still flared during moments of stress, his body's way of reminding him that some wounds transcended mere flesh. The names on his tattoo seemed to burn against his skin as memories flooded back unbidden. Danny's laugh echoing across a firebase in Helmand province. Santos teaching him to make perfect café con leche using an MRE heater and instant coffee. Ghost's uncanny ability to appear and disappear like smoke, earning his nickname through supernatural stealth skills that had saved their lives countless times. All gone now. All reduced to black ink and painful memories that no amount of therapy could fully heal. Marcus closed his eyes and tried to employ the breathing techniques his VA counselor had taught him, but the student's increasingly loud commentary made concentration impossible. He was trapped between his need to remain invisible and his growing desire to educate these ignorant children about the true cost of their freedom. The laptop screen blurred as unshed tears gathered in his eyes. This was his new normal, a constant battle between the warrior he had been and the broken civilian. He had become fighting a war that existed only in the battlefield of his own mind. Tyler Morrison's voice cut through the coffee shop's ambient noise like a rusty blade, his words dripping with the kind of casual cruelty that only comes from never having faced real consequences. "Look at Captain America over there," he announced, loudly gesturing toward Marcus with his overpriced artisanal latte. "I bet he tells everyone he's a Navy SEAL. These military wannabes are everywhere now, probably watched Top Gun one too many times and decided to get some intimidating ink to compensate for never actually serving." The 21-year-old political science major had perfected the art of performative intellectualism, using his privilege like a shield while attacking those he perceived as beneath his enlightened worldview. His Ralph Lauren polo shirt, designer jeans, and Italian leather loafers screamed money, the kind of old money that had funded 3 generations of Ivy League educations and guaranteed positions in prestigious law firms. Tyler had never worked a day in his life, never missed a meal, never wondered if he'd live to see another sunrise. His girlfriend, Emma Richardson, giggled with malicious delight as she discreetly aimed her iPhone camera toward Marcus's table. At 19, she was already a master of social media manipulation, her Instagram account carefully curated to showcase a lifestyle of endless brunches, designer handbags, and virtue-signaling posts about social justice, all while living off her parents' pharmaceutical fortune. She had 87,000 followers who hung on her every word, desperate for validation from someone who had never faced genuine hardship. "Oh my God, Tyler, you're so right," Emma squealed, her voice pitched to carry across the cafe. "It's like so embarrassing how these guys think their tattoos make them special. My daddy says the military is just where people go when they're too stupid for college." She held her phone steadier, already composing the caption in her mind. When toxic masculinity meets military worship culture, hashtag cringe, hashtag tattoo, regret hashtag military worship. Our friend Josh Brennan, a sociology major whose senior thesis explored the psychological pathology of American military culture, nodded sagely from behind his thick-rimmed glasses. A 22-year-old had spent 4 years studying theoretical frameworks about violence and masculinity without ever witnessing either firsthand. His entire worldview had been shaped by academic papers and documentary films, creating a dangerous combination of intellectual arrogance and complete ignorance about the realities he so confidently criticized. It's classic compensation behavior, Josh proclaimed, raising his voice professorial. Men who feel inadequate about their masculinity often resort to military symbolism and aggressive imagery to project strength they don't actually possess. The tattoo is essentially a cry for help, a desperate attempt to convince others, and himself, that he's more than just another insecure male struggling with his identity in postmodern society. Tyler's eyes lit up with cruel inspiration. Exactly. And look at him sitting there all brooding and mysterious. I bet he practices that wounded warrior look in the mirror. He stood up slightly, projecting his voice even louder. Hey, buddy. Which Call of Duty game inspired that masterpiece on your arm? Modern Warfare or Black Ops? The entire coffee shop began to shift uncomfortably. An elderly man near the window, clearly a veteran himself based on his Marine Corps baseball cap, started to rise from his chair, his face flushing red with anger. A young barista behind the counter gripped her cleaning rag tighter, torn between her customer service training and her desire to intervene. Regular patrons exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the cruelty but unsure how to respond. Emma was practically vibrating with excitement as her video captured every moment of Tyler's performance. This was going to be viral gold. Her followers loved content that punched down at easy targets, especially military types who couldn't fight back without looking aggressive. She zoomed in on Marcus's tattoo, making sure to capture the names and dates that she assumed were fictional additions to make his costume more convincing. I'm posting this to TikTok too, she whispered to Tyler. This is exactly the kind of toxic masculinity content that gets millions of views. My professor in gender studies will love this. It's perfect evidence of how military culture perpetuates harmful stereotypes about manhood. Tyler fed off her encouragement like a vampire drawing blood. His voice rose another octave, now loud, enough to be heard in the kitchen. You know what's really sad? He probably tells everyone he was some kind of special forces hero. Navy SEALs, Green Berets, whatever sounds most impressive to impress girls at bars. Meanwhile, the closest he's been to combat is playing Xbox in his mom's basement. Josh couldn't resist adding his own academic flourish. Studies show that men with extensive military-themed tattoos are statistically more likely to have exaggerated or completely fabricated their service records. It's a form of stolen valor that feeds into broader narratives about American exceptionalism and the glorification of violence. Marcus's hands had begun to shake visibly now, his breathing becoming increasingly rapid and shallow. The familiar signs of an impending panic attack were mounting: the tunnel vision, the chest tightness, the phantom sounds of gunfire mixing with the coffee shop's innocent ambient noise. His right hand instinctively moved to his shoulder, pressing against the spot where real shrapnel had torn through real flesh during a real firefight that had claimed real lives. Tyler noticed the movement and misinterpreted it completely. Oh, look. Now he's touching his war wound. Let me guess, you got that heroic injury during an intense paintball match, right? Or maybe you hurt yourself getting that ridiculous tattoo? His laughter was sharp and cunning, designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Emma's phone captured every second of Marcus's visible distress, but she interpreted his trauma response as embarrassment at being exposed. Her followers We're going to eat this up, a fake military hero getting called out and humiliated in public. This was exactly the kind of content that generated engagement, comments, and shares. The mockery had reached a crescendo, their voices now carrying across the entire establishment. Other customers were beginning to actively stare, some with disgust at the students' behavior, others with curiosity about the drama unfolding before them. The tension in the room had become palpable, electric with the potential for confrontation. Marcus closed his eyes, fighting to control his breathing as the names on his tattoo seemed to burn against his skin. Danny, Miguel, Ghost, his fallen brothers, would have handled this differently. They would have stood up, faced these privileged children, and educated them about respect. But Marcus wasn't sure he could trust himself to remain controlled if he engaged. The warrior in him was screaming for action, while the broken civilian just wanted to disappear. The brass bell above Brood Awakening's entrance chimed with a resonance that cut through the coffee shop's chaos like a ship's alarm piercing fog. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than physics should allow, as if announcing the arrival of something significant. Every head in the establishment turned instinctively toward the door, conversations faltering mid-sentence as an unmistakable presence filled the room. Commander Sarah Ice Rodriguez stepped across the threshold with the fluid precision of a predator entering new territory. Her navy dress blues were immaculate, every ribbon, every crease, every brass button positioned with mathematical exactness that spoke of decades of military discipline. At 44, she commanded respect through presence alone, her bearing so distinctly military that civilians instinctively straightened their posture in her vicinity without understanding why. The uniform told a story that few could read, but all could sense. Rows of ribbons decorated her chest like a colorful timeline of classified operations across 3 continents. The silver star caught the coffee shop's warm lighting, the nation's 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. Below it, the bronze star with V device for heroism, the purple heart for wounds received in action, and a dozen other decorations that represented missions the general public would never know about. But it was the golden seal trident pinned above her ribbons that marked her as truly exceptional. Commander Rodriguez was among the first women to earn that coveted symbol, having fought through years of institutional resistance, physical trials that broke grown men, and combat operations, where gender became irrelevant in the face of enemy fire. The Budweiser on her uniform represented not just personal achievement, but a barrier shattered for all the women who would follow. Her steel-gray eyes swept the cafe with tactical precision that had been honed in hostile territories from Iraq to Syria to classified locations that existed only in heavily redacted mission reports. Those eyes cataloged everything in seconds. 17 customers, 4 staff members, 3 exits, 2 potential choke points, 1 obvious threat situation developing near the windows. Her peripheral vision noted the college students' ongoing harassment, while her primary focus locked onto a familiar figure hunched in the corner booth. Rodriguez's breath caught in her throat as recognition hit her like a physical blow. The young man's profile, the distinctive tattoo partially visible on his forearm, the way he held his shoulders, all of it triggered memories she had carefully compartmentalized in the deepest vaults of her mind. This was Marcus Chun, though he looked nothing like the confident young SEAL she remembered from their last mission. Together, her mind instantly transported her back to that hellish ridge outside Kandahar. September 15th, 2021. The intelligence had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. What should have been a simple reconnaissance mission had turned into a coordinated Taliban ambush involving over 200 enemy fighters. Her 8-man team had been pinned down for 14 hours in a boulder field with no cover, no air support, and dwindling ammunition. She remembered Marcus as he had been then 26 years old, muscles coiled like steel cables, eyes bright with the invincible confidence of youth and extensive training. He had been her communications specialist and backup sniper, one of the most promising young SEALs she had ever commanded. His quick thinking and steady hands under fire had saved lives that day, even as their world exploded around them in a symphony of automatic weapons fire and rocket-propelled grenades. The coordinates tattooed on his arm, 33.9391N, 67.7100E, burned into Rodriguez's memory with surgical precision. She could still smell the cordite and blood, still hear Danny Morrison's final radio transmission as he made the ultimate sacrifice to cover their extraction. Still see Marcus's face as he screamed Morrison's name while the medevac helicopter lifted off, leaving behind pieces of their souls in that cursed valley. The college students' cruel laughter snapped Rodriguez back to the present, their voices carrying clearly across the coffee shop despite the ambient noise. She heard every word of their mockery, every casual dismissal of sacrifice they couldn't comprehend. Her jaw clenched with controlled fury as she watched Marcus shrinking into himself, his warrior spirit being systematically dismantled by these privileged children who had never earned the right to speak his name, let alone judge his service. Rodriguez approached the counter with measured steps, each footfall deliberate and precise. The young barista, a college kid himself, probably working to pay for textbooks these other students' parents bought without thought, immediately straightened to attention. Something about the commander's presence triggered primal recognition of authority that transcended civilian understanding. Black coffee, Rodriguez ordered, her voice carrying the particular brand of quiet authority that had commanded respect in boardrooms and battlefields alike. Large, no sugar, no cream. Her tone was professional, controlled, but underneath ran an electric current of barely contained emotion that made the barista's hands shake slightly as he prepared her order. While waiting, Rodriguez studied Marcus through her peripheral vision, noting details that civilian eyes would miss. The way he favored his right shoulder shrapnel wounds that had ended his career. The slight tremor in his hands, PTSD symptoms she recognized from her own dark nights. The hollow look in his eyes, survivor's guilt that no metal could heal. The tattoo artwork was even more elaborate than she had initially observed. Beyond the seal trident and coordinates, she could make out additional details that spoke of careful planning and deep meaning. Each name was surrounded by small symbols representing shared memories. A tiny guitar for Santos, who had played around campfires in forward operating bases. A ghost silhouette for Patterson, whose stealth skills had bordered on supernatural. A compass rose for Morrison, their navigator who had always brought them home. Until that last mission. Until Rodriguez had been forced to make the impossible command decision to leave the dead behind and extract the living. Until Marcus had to watch his best friend's body disappear into enemy territory because operational security demanded immediate evacuation. The students' mockery crescendoed behind her, their voices now loud enough to disturb customers throughout the establishment. Rodriguez could see other patrons shifting uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty of lacking the context to intervene effectively. An elderly veteran near the window was rising from his chair, his face flushed with anger, but Rodriguez knew this situation required more than righteous indignation. This required the truth. And she was the only person in this coffee shop who knew Marcus Chun's story well enough to tell it. Commander Rodriguez's hands remained perfectly steady as she lifted the steaming coffee cup to her lips. But internally, her world was reeling from the ghostly resurrection of memories she had buried in classified files and sleepless nights. Through her peripheral vision, she studied Marcus's tattoo with the analytical precision of someone who had lived every coordinate, date, and name etched into his scarred flesh. This wasn't just ink and skin. It was a living memorial to the worst day of her military career. The numbers, 33.9391 and 67.710 were seared into her consciousness like a brand. She could recite those coordinates in her sleep, had whispered them during countless debriefings, had seen them typed in reports marked top secret, and filed away where families would never read the truth about how their sons had died. That precise location in the Hindu Kush mountains represented the exact spot where her carefully planned reconnaissance mission had transformed into a nightmare that still invaded her dreams 3 years later. Rodriguez's trained eye traced the intricate details of Marcus's memorial tattoo, recognizing elements that only someone who had been there could fully understand. The names weren't just randomly placed. They were positioned according to where each man had fallen during the firefight. Danny Morrison curved along the top, representing his final position on the ridge's highest point where he had made his last stand. Miguel Santos was positioned to the left, marking the rocky outcropping where he had provided covering fire until his ammunition ran out. James "Ghost" Patterson occupied the bottom right, commemorating the hidden sniper's nest where he had held off an entire Taliban squad until a mortar round found its mark. But it was the fourth name on the tattoo that made Rodriguez's breath catch in her throat. Rodriguez was inscribed in elegant script along the seal trident's base, positioned as the foundation supporting all the others. Marcus had included her name among his honored dead, not because she had died, but because he blamed himself for the impossible command decisions she had been forced to make that day. The young SEAL had never forgiven himself for surviving when his brothers didn't, and apparently he had never forgiven her for ordering the extraction that saved his life. The memory flooded back with crystalline clarity. Marcus had been her communications specialist and backup sniper, a 26-year-old prodigy whose steady hands and quick thinking had kept them alive during 14 hours of continuous combat. She remembered the exact moment when shrapnel from a Taliban rocket had torn through his shoulder, spinning him around and painting the rocks with his blood. He had refused medical attention, continuing to call in fire support coordinates while his lifeblood seeped through makeshift bandages. Rodriguez could still hear his voice over the radio static, professional and controlled, even as his world collapsed. Overlord, this is Charlie 6. We have multiple KIA, urgent medevac required. Grid coordinates 33.9391 north, 67.7100 east. Enemy contact continues. LZ is not secure. Repeat, LZ is not secure. His voice had cracked only once when he transmitted Morrison's casualty report. Overlord, Charlie 1 is KIA. Danny Morrison is here. The college students' cruel laughter snapped Rodriguez back to the present, their mockery becoming increasingly vicious as they fed off each other's cruelty. Tyler Morrison, the cosmic irony of his shared surname with Marcus's fallen brother, wasn't lost on the commander, was performing for his social media audience, completely oblivious to the fact that he was desecrating the memory of a genuine American hero who happened to share his family name. I bet he Googled some random military stuff and just copied it onto his arm, Tyler was saying, his voice dripping with privileged contempt. Like, who puts coordinates in a tattoo? That's so try hard. Real military guys don't need to advertise their service. His girlfriend Emma continued filming, her phone capturing every moment of Marcus's visible distress as the young veteran fought to control his trauma response. Rodriguez watched Marcus's hands shake as he gripped his coffee cup, recognizing the telltale signs of an impending panic attack. She had seen those same symptoms in dozens of combat veterans, had experienced them herself during the dark months following their extraction from Afghanistan. The tremor, the rapid breathing, the way his eyes kept darting to the exits classic. PTSD responses triggered by the psychological assault these ignorant children were unleashing without understanding the damage they were causing. The tattoo artist had done exceptional work, Rodriguez noted professionally. Every detail was perfect, from the precise angles of the seal trident to the specific font used for the coordinates. This wasn't some random military-themed artwork. It was a carefully planned memorial that had obviously taken multiple sessions to complete. The shading around the names suggested depth and dimension, making each letter appear carved into stone, rather than simply inked into skin. Rodriguez's military mind automatically calculated angles and positions, noting that Marcus had chosen the corner booth for tactical reasons back to the wall. Clear sightlines to all entrances, quick access to emergency exits. Even in his damaged state, his SEAL training was evident in his unconscious choices. The laptop he was working on displayed mechanical engineering coursework, suggesting he was using his GI Bill benefits to rebuild his life after medical discharge. The commander's heart ached as she recognized the profound loneliness in Marcus's posture. She knew from bitter experience how isolation could consume combat veterans, how survivors' guilt could transform heroes into ghosts haunting the edges of civilian society. Marcus had clearly cut all ties with his former teammates, refusing the brotherhood that might have helped him heal. She had tried to reach out after his discharge, but he had changed his phone number, moved without leaving a forwarding address, and disappeared into the anonymity of civilian life. Now she understood why. Marcus hadn't just survived that mission, he had been forced to live with the weight of impossible decisions, carrying the names of his fallen brothers on his skin and the burden of their sacrifice in his soul. The tattoo wasn't just memorial art. It was penance, a permanent reminder of his perceived failures etched into his flesh where he could never forget. The students' mockery reached a new crescendo, their voices now loud enough to disturb customers throughout the establishment. Rodriguez could see the elderly Marine veteran near the window preparing to intervene, his weathered face flushed with righteous anger. Other patrons were shifting uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty but lacking the context to respond effectively. It was time to act. Marcus Chun deserved better than this casual destruction of his dignity by children who had never earned the right to speak his name. Rodriguez set down her coffee cup with military precision and began walking toward the confrontation, her dress uniform and commanding presence parting the crowded cafe. Like a ship cutting through turbulent seas. The moment of truth had arrived. Tyler's voice reached its crescendo of cruelty, each word designed to inflict maximum psychological damage on his target. I bet he tells everyone he's a Navy SEAL at bars to pick up girls. These wannabes are so pathetic, probably watched a few war movies and decided to cosplay as a hero. That ridiculous tattoo probably cost more than his monthly disability check. His laughter was sharp and cutting, echoing off the coffee shop's exposed brick walls like the crack of a whip. Emma's phone captured every second of Marcus's visible deterioration, her followers already commenting with crying laughing emojis and fire symbols as the video went live. "This is going viral, babe," she whispered excitedly to Tyler. 40,000 views already and climbing. Everyone's loving this military poseur getting exposed. Her manicured finger hovered over the share button, ready to broadcast Marcus's humiliation across every social platform she controlled. But Tyler's next words died in his throat like a strangled scream as Commander Rodriguez materialized beside their table with the fluid, predatory grace of an apex predator. The college student's conversation didn't just pause, it died completely, as if someone had pulled the plug on their cruel performance. The temperature in the coffee shop seemed to drop 10 degrees as their presence filled the space around them like a gathering storm. Rodriguez stood at perfect military attention, her dress blue uniform immaculate under the cafe's warm lighting. Every ribbon on her chest caught the light like armor, each decoration representing missions these children could never comprehend. Her steel-gray eyes fixed on Marcus with laser intensity, cutting through the crowd noise and chaos to establish a connection that transcended the physical space between them. Without breaking eye contact with Marcus, without acknowledging the stunned college students, without so much as glancing at the phone recording her every move, Commander Rodriguez brought her right hand up in the crispest, most perfect military salute of her 24-year career. Her movement was fluid poetry, each element executed with mathematical precision that spoke of thousands of hours of drill and ceremony, countless flag-draped coffins, and the sacred bonds forged in combat. The entire coffee shop fell silent, as if a sound engineer had cut the audio feed. Conversations stopped mid-syllable. Espresso machines ceased their hissing. Even the ambient jazz music seemed to fade into reverent quiet. 67 people in. That establishment suddenly found themselves witnessing something profound, something sacred, something that demanded absolute silence and respect. Marcus's eyes widened in shock that bordered on terror as recognition crashed over him like a tidal wave. His coffee cup slipped from nerveless fingers, ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor in a percussion that sounded like gunshots. In the supernatural quiet, 3 years of carefully constructed emotional barriers crumbled in an instant as he stared into the face of the woman who had saved his life and haunted his nightmares in equal measure. "Commander Rodriguez," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the silence. The words were part greeting, part prayer, part accusation. A complex emotional symphony, compressed into 2 simple words that contained multitudes of pain, gratitude, and unresolved trauma. Tears began streaming down Marcus's face as muscle. Memory overrode 3 years of civilian conditioning. His body moved without conscious thought, rising from the booth with the fluid precision that had been drilled into him during countless hours of military training. His own salute was textbook perfect, despite his trembling hands, executed with the automatic response of a warrior recognizing his commanding officer. Rodriguez held her salute for 20 seconds that stretched like eternity, her arm rock steady, despite the emotional earthquake occurring in her chest. This wasn't just military courtesy, this was a sacred ritual, a recognition of shared sacrifice, a moment of communion between 2 souls who had walked through hell together and emerged forever changed. The coffee shop's other patrons instinctively understood they were witnessing something significant, even if they couldn't comprehend its full meaning. An elderly Marine veteran near the window slowly rose to his feet, his weathered hand moving to his heart in civilian tribute. A young woman at the counter began crying without understanding why. Even the barista stopped pretending to work, his cleaning rag forgotten as he stared at the unfolding drama. Tyler's face drained of color as the implications began penetrating his privileged bubble of ignorance. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist under the scorching reality of actual military authority. Emma's phone continued recording, but her hands had begun shaking so violently that the footage became a blur of movement and emotion. Josh pushed his designer glasses up his nose with trembling fingers, his academic theories about military culture suddenly seeming pathetically inadequate when confronted with its living reality. The sociology textbooks had never prepared him for this moment, had never explained the raw power of recognition between warriors who had shared the ultimate test of human courage. Marcus's salute wavered as emotion overwhelmed his physical control. His right shoulder, the one destroyed by Taliban shrapnel, began to burn with phantom pain that he had learned to ignore but could never fully escape. The names on his tattoo seemed to pulse with heat against his skin as memories of that terrible day flooded back with documentary clarity. Rodriguez could see the young man's internal struggle, recognizing the signs of PTSD that she had battled in countless other veterans. But she held her salute steady, providing the anchor of command authority that Marcus desperately needed. This moment wasn't just about military courtesy. It was about healing, about recognition, about one warrior acknowledging another's sacrifice in the most public way possible. The silence stretched on, becoming something living and powerful that filled every corner of the coffee shop. Other customers found themselves holding their breath, sensing that they were witnessing history in the making. This wasn't just a chance encounter, it was a moment of redemption, a public validation of service and sacrifice that transcended simple military protocol. Finally, Rodriguez began to lower her salute with the same ceremonial precision she had used to raise it. Marcus followed her lead, their movements synchronized like a carefully choreographed dance of respect and recognition. As their hands returned to their sides, the spell wasn't broken, it was transformed, evolving from ritual into something approaching justice. The truth was about to be unleashed, and nothing would ever be the same. Commander Rodriguez's voice cut through the supernatural silence like a blade forged in the fires of righteous fury, each word precisely articulated and carrying the full weight of military authority earned through 2 decades of combat. Leadership. Her steel-gray eyes swept the coffee shop with predatory intensity, before settling on the 3 college students who had suddenly discovered what it felt like to be prey. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, her voice pitched to reach every corner of the establishment. "Allow me to introduce Petty Officer First Class Marcus Chun, United States Navy SEALs." The formal introduction carried the ceremonial gravity of a medal presentation, transforming Marcus from anonymous target into honored hero with surgical precision. Silver Star recipient for conspicuous gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States. Tyler's face went from pale to green as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami of realization. His mouth hung open and soundless. Horror, his earlier bravado completely evaporated as he faced the catastrophic reality of his mistake. This wasn't some pretender he had been mocking. This was a genuine American hero, a warrior who had earned his decorations through blood and sacrifice that Tyler's privileged mind couldn't begin to comprehend. Rodriguez continued her devastating revelation with the methodical precision of an artillery barrage, each sentence carefully calculated for maximum impact. Purple Heart recipient for wounds received in action against enemy forces in Afghanistan. Bronze Star with Valor device for heroic achievement in ground combat operations. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, leaving no room for doubt or denial. Emma's iPhone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor as the full scope of their cruelty became clear. The video that had been destined for viral fame now documented their complete humiliation, their casual destruction of a genuine war hero's dignity captured in high definition for all eternity. Her 87,000 followers would see her exposed as the privileged, ignorant child she truly was. "That ridiculous tattoo you've been mocking," Rodriguez's voice rose with controlled fury, "contains the exact coordinates where Petty Officer Chun conducted the most heroic action I witnessed in 24 years of military service. Coordinates 33.9391 degrees north, 67.7100 degrees east, the Hindu Kush Mountains of Afghanistan, where he saved the lives of 12 United States Marines and 4 Navy SEALs through extraordinary heroism under fire." Josh's academic theories about military psychology crumbled like ancient parchment as he faced the living reality of warrior culture. His thick-rimmed glasses fogged with nervous perspiration as he realized that everything he thought he knew about military service had been filtered through the safe distance of classroom theory, completely divorced from the brutal realities that men like Marcus faced in defense of their nation. Rodriguez stepped closer to the students' table, her presence radiating the kind of authority that made hardened terrorists confess their secrets and foreign diplomats reconsider their positions. Each name on that tattoo represents a brother who died in Marcus's arms while he called in danger-close artillery strikes on his own position to prevent enemy forces from overrunning a Marine Corps outpost. The coffee shop's atmosphere had transformed from casual morning routine into something approaching a military tribunal. Every customer sat in stunned silence, their mundane concerns suddenly seeming trivial compared to the drama unfolding before them. The elderly Marine veteran near the window stood at attention, tears streaming down his weathered face as he recognized the sacred nature of what he was witnessing. "Danny Morrison," Rodriguez continued, her voice catching slightly as she spoke. The name that appeared prominently on Marcus's tattoo died providing covering fire so that 37 American servicemen could reach safety. He was 24 years old, engaged to his high school sweetheart, and he gave his life so that people like you could sit in coffee shops, making ignorant jokes about things you'll never understand. Tyler tried to speak, his voice emerging. As a strangled whisper, "Morrison ... That's my name, too." The cosmic irony wasn't lost on anyone present. He shared a surname with the hero whose memory he had been desecrating through his mockery of Marcus. Rodriguez's eyes blazed with the fire of divine judgment as she continued her devastating exposition. Miguel Santos, 26 years old, father of twin daughters who will never remember their daddy's voice. James Patterson, called Ghost, because of his ability to appear and disappear like smoke, until a Taliban mortar round found his position and silenced his rifle forever. The barista behind the counter openly wept as he processed the magnitude of sacrifice being described. His own problems, student loans, work schedules, relationship drama suddenly seemed embarrassingly trivial compared to the ultimate price. These young warriors had paid for his freedom to worry about such mundane concerns. Marcus Chun, Rodriguez's voice softened with professional respect and personal affection, remained conscious and operational for 14 hours with shrapnel embedded in his shoulder, continuing to coordinate fire support and medical evacuations while his own blood painted the rocks around his position. He saved 37 lives that day while watching his closest friends die one by one. Emma found her voice, though it emerged as a barely audible sob. "We didn't know... How could we know?" Her question hung in the air like an accusation against her own ignorance, her privileged assumption that she could judge people without understanding their stories. "That's exactly the problem," Rodriguez replied with cutting precision. "You didn't know, but you judged anyway. You saw a man sitting quietly, bothering no one, and you decided to destroy him for your own entertainment. You filmed his pain for social media content without considering that he might be fighting battles you couldn't imagine." The commander's words hit the college students like physical blows, each revelation adding another layer to their understanding of just how catastrophically they had misjudged the situation. This wasn't just embarrassment. This was a complete moral reckoning that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Rodriguez turned back to Marcus, who stood trembling beside his table like a man facing his own resurrection. Petty Officer Chun earned every decoration on his record through actions that most people couldn't comprehend, even if they witnessed them firsthand. He is a genuine American hero, and anyone who says otherwise can answer to me personally. The coffee shop erupted in spontaneous applause that shook the windows and rattled the cups on their saucers. A thunderous acknowledgement of truth finally revealed and justice finally served. Tyler Morrison stumbled toward Marcus like a condemned man walking to his execution, his legs barely supporting him as the full magnitude of his cruelty crashed down upon his shoulders with the weight of divine judgment. His face had gone beyond. Pale, it was ashen, gray like old concrete, as if the blood had simply abandoned his body in horror at what he had done. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled from running trembling fingers through it, his designer polo shirt wrinkled and stained with nervous perspiration. "Jesus Christ." Tyler's voice cracked like a 13-year-old's, the words emerging as a strangled whisper that seemed to tear his throat raw. Danny Morrison ... That's my great-uncle's name. He died in Vietnam when my grandfather was just a kid. God, what have I done? The cosmic irony hit him like a physical blow. He shared not just a surname, but actual family blood with military heroes, yet had somehow grown up ignorant of their sacrifice. Tears streamed down his face as the protective bubble of privilege that had insulated him from life's harsh realities finally burst. For 21 years, Tyler had lived in a world where his biggest concerns were choosing between Harvard and Yale, where his trust fund guaranteed a future free from consequence, where his parents' connections ensured that doors would always open for him. Now, faced with genuine heroism and sacrifice, his entire worldview was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. "I'm so sorry," Tyler sobbed, his voice breaking into fragments. "I'm so fucking sorry. I thought... He couldn't finish the sentence because there was no excuse, no justification that could possibly explain away what he had done. He had taken a genuine American hero and turned him into entertainment, had transformed sacred sacrifice into social media content, had weaponized ignorance against a man who had given everything for his country. Emma Richardson sat frozen in her chair, her phone forgotten on the floor beside Tyler's fallen device. Both screens cracked from their impact with the hardwood. Her carefully curated Instagram image, the privileged socialite with her virtue signaling. Posts about social justice lay in ruins around her like the debris from a moral explosion. 87,000 followers had watched her participate in the systematic destruction of a war hero's dignity, and the comments section was already filling with outraged reactions as viewers realized what they had witnessed. Her father's pharmaceutical fortune suddenly felt like blood money in her hands. All those charity galas and awareness campaigns she had attended, all those posts about supporting veterans and military families, they were revealed as hollow performance art. Virtue signaling from someone who couldn't recognize genuine service when it sat 3 feet away from her table. The tears came in great, gasping sobs that shook her entire body. "My God, what kind of monster am I?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above her crying. "I filmed him suffering. I was going to make him go viral for all the wrong reasons. Those comments ... People were laughing at him because of me." The realization that she had turned Marcus's trauma into entertainment for the masses hit her like a sledgehammer to the chest. Josh Brennan stood paralyzed beside the table, his thick-rimmed glasses fogged with perspiration and shame. His entire academic career had been built on theoretical frameworks about military culture, sociological analyses of warrior psychology, dissertations about the pathology of American violence. Now, confronted with the living reality of military service, his ivory tower theories crumbled into intellectual dust. 4 years, Josh mumbled to himself, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. 4 years studying military culture, and I understood nothing. Absolutely nothing. His senior thesis, The Psychological Pathology of American Military Culture, suddenly seemed like the pretentious rambling of a child who had mistaken academic jargon for wisdom. He had dissected the warrior ethos from the safety of library, carols and lecture halls, never understanding that he was studying men who had willingly walked into hell so that people like him could safely theorize about violence they would never face. The other coffee shop patrons watched the college student's complete moral breakdown with a mixture of satisfaction and pity. The elderly Marine veteran approached slowly, his weathered face stern but not unkind. "Son," he said to Tyler, his voice gravelly with age and experience, "the first step toward honor is recognizing when you've lost it. You 3 kids have a long road ahead if you want to earn back the right to call yourselves Americans." Marcus stood silently throughout their emotional collapse, watching these privileged children confront the reality of their actions. His warriors, Heart felt no satisfaction in their suffering, only a profound sadness for the ignorance that had bred such casual cruelty. He could see himself in their youth, remembering his own naive assumptions before military service had stripped away his illusions about the world's harsh realities. Commander Rodriguez maintained her protective stance beside Marcus, her presence serving as both shield and sword. She had seen this kind of breakdown before privileged civilians, confronted with the true cost of their freedom, their comfortable worldview shattered by contact with those who had paid prices they couldn't imagine. Some learned from the experience and grew into better people. Others retreated deeper into denial and resentment. Tyler fell to his knees beside Marcus's table, no longer caring about appearances or social status. His expensive clothes were rumpled, his face streaked with tears and snot, his carefully maintained image destroyed as completely as his moral certainty. "Please," he begged, looking up at Marcus with desperate eyes. "Tell me how to fix this. Tell me how to make this right. I'll do anything." The coffee shop held its collective breath, waiting for Marcus's response. This was the moment of truth. Would the warrior show mercy to those who had shown him none? Would forgiveness be possible after such complete destruction of dignity? The answer would define not just Marcus's character, but the moral trajectory of 3 young lives hanging in the fuzz. Balance between redemption and ruin. Outside, Seattle rain continued to fall against the windows like tears from heaven, as if the city itself was weeping for the innocence lost and the hard lessons learned in this small corner of the world where privilege had collided with sacrifice and ignorance had met its reckoning. Marcus Chun looked down at Tyler Morrison's broken form kneeling beside his table, seeing not an enemy to be defeated, but a lost child who had stumbled blindly into a lesson that would define the rest of his life. The young veteran's dark eyes, haunted by 3 years of survivor's guilt and PTSD nightmares, softened with the kind of hard-earned wisdom that could only come from watching brothers die and learning to carry their memory with honor rather than hatred. "Stand up, son," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had commanded men in life-and-death situations. "Real warriors don't kneel except to honor the fallen." His words were firm, but not cruel, instructive rather than punitive. Tyler scrambled to his feet, wiping his tear-streaked face with the back of his hand, looking like a chastened child who had just learned that actions have consequences. The transformation in the coffee shop was immediate and profound. Every customer had risen to their feet, as if responding to some invisible call to attention, creating an impromptu honor guard that stretched from the entrance to Marcus's corner booth. The elderly Marine veteran removed his baseball cap and held it over his heart, his weathered face wet with tears of recognition. A middle-aged woman near the counter clutched her purse against her chest, openly weeping as she processed the magnitude of sacrifice she was witnessing. Behind the espresso machine, the barista, a 22-year-old named David, whose biggest worry had been making rent money, stared at Marcus with newfound respect. His grandfather had been a Vietnam veteran who never talked about his service, who carried invisible wounds that David had never understood until this moment. Now, seeing Marcus's quiet dignity in the face of cruel mockery, David finally comprehended what his grandfather had endured in silence for 50 years. Commander Rodriguez watched the scene unfold with professional satisfaction mixed with maternal pride. She had seen Marcus at his lowest point, bleeding and broken in that Afghan valley, screaming Danny Morrison's name as the medevac lifted off. She had watched him blame himself for surviving when better men had died, had seen survivors' guilt consume him until he disappeared from their brotherhood entirely. Now, witnessing his grace under fire in a different kind of battle, she knew that the young warrior she had trained was still alive beneath the layers of trauma and self-doubt. "Tyler Morrison," Marcus said, extending his scarred hand toward the young man whose surname connected him to the hero. commemorated in permanent ink on Marcus's arm. Your great-uncle Danny would be proud to know you learned something important. Today, he died so that people like you could have the freedom to make mistakes and grow from them. Tyler grasped Marcus's hand with both of his own, holding on as if the contact could somehow transfer the courage and honor he so desperately needed. I want to learn, he whispered urgently. I want to understand what service really means. Not the theoretical bullshit Josh and I studied in our classes, but the real thing. Will you teach me? Emma Richardson approached hesitantly, her phone clutched in trembling hands. The video, she said, her voice thick with shame and determination. I need to delete it, but first, would you let me post something else? Something that tells the truth about what happened here? I have nearly 90,000 followers who need to see what real heroism looks like. Marcus considered her request carefully, understanding that this moment could either perpetuate the cycle of public humiliation or transform it into something educational and healing. Keep the original, he said finally, but add context. Tell them about Danny Morrison, Miguel Santos, and Ghost Patterson. Tell them that freedom isn't free, and that the men and women who pay its price deserve our respect, not our mockery. Josh Brennan stood awkwardly to the side, his academic confidence completely shattered by contact with reality. My thesis, he mumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. 4 years of research about military pathology, and I never interviewed a single veteran. I never talked to anyone who had actually served. He looked at Marcus with desperate eyes. Would you? Could I interview you? Not for my thesis, but to learn what I should have learned years ago? The coffee shop's atmosphere had transformed from hostile confrontation to something approaching a sacred gathering. Other customers began approaching Marcus, not as curiosity seekers, but as Americans who had suddenly been reminded of the debt they owed to those who served. An elderly woman pressed a handwritten note into his hands, thanking him for his service. A construction worker bought him a coffee and left without saying a word, understanding that some gestures transcended language. David, the young barista, approached with a large coffee and a sleeve of chocolate chip cookies. On the house, he said simply. My grandfather was in Nam. He never talked about it, but I think I understand now why he used to get that look in his eyes sometimes. He paused, then added, Thank you for helping me understand what he went through. Commander Rodriguez placed her hand on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the tension that had been coiled in his muscles for 3 years finally beginning to release. Danny Morrison would be proud, son, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of command authority and personal affection. Miguel Santos would be laughing at how you handled these kids with kid gloves instead of the ass-kicking they deserved. And Ghost Patterson would probably say you've gone soft in your old age. Marcus smiled for the first time in months, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his careworn features into something approaching the young warrior Rodriguez remembered. Maybe I have gone soft, Commander, but I think that's okay. We didn't fight so we could stay hard forever. The spontaneous applause that erupted from the coffee shop customers was thunderous, echoing off the brick walls and rattling the windows. Facing the Seattle street, it wasn't just appreciation for Marcus's service. It was celebration of a moment when truth triumphed over ignorance, when education conquered prejudice, when mercy proved more powerful than revenge. As the applause continued, Tyler Morrison found his voice one final time. Sir, he called out above the noise, using the honorific instinctively. How do I make sure I never forget this lesson? Marcus looked at the young man whose great-uncle's name was etched permanently in his skin, whose family had contributed to the same legacy of service that Tyler had unknowingly mocked. Remember that freedom isn't free, Tyler Morrison. And remember that the price is paid by people you'll probably never meet, who ask for nothing in return except that you used that freedom wisely. Outside, the Seattle rain had stopped and golden. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the coffee shop windows, illuminating the faces of everyone present like a benediction. In this small corner of America, 3 young people had learned what it meant to be citizens worthy of the sacrifice made on their behalf. And one wounded warrior had rediscovered his purpose in teaching rather than mourning. The story had ended, not with vengeance, but with redemption, exactly as it should be in a nation, built on second chances and the belief that people could grow beyond their mistakes into something better than they were before.